Hey y'all, welcome to Southern Five Felonies. Imagine, February 1959. 9 young hikers, smart, strong, and experienced, set off into the icy wilderness of the Ural Mountains. They laughed, they sang, they took goofy photos along the trail, but just a few days later, every single one of them would be found dead. Scattered across the frozen slope of a mountain the locals called the Mountain of the Dead. Their tent torn open from the inside, their boots and coats left behind, their bodies found half naked in the snow, some crushed as if hit by a car, one missing her tongue, and to make it even stranger, their clothes tested positive for radiation. Now, if this sounds like a setup for a horror movie, congratulations, you've just stumbled into one of the most infamous, unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. The Dyatlov Pass incident. For decades, people have argued about what happened that night. Was it a natural disaster? Some freak accident of wind and snow? A Soviet military experiment gone wrong? A cover-up? A cryptid? Aliens? Or was it something so simple, so human, that the truth feels too boring to accept? Today we're going to dig into everything. The hiker's journey, the strange discoveries, the autopsies, and every theory from the sober to the downright insane. By the end, you'll either be convinced this was just bad luck in the mountains, or something seriously sinister happened on that slope in 1959. Either way, bundle up, it's about to get cold. So, before we dive into the creepy stuff, let's talk about the group itself, because these weren't clueless campers wandering off into the woods with a pack of marshmallows and good intentions. These people knew what they were doing. The expedition was led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, the guy whose name would eventually get stamped on this entire mystery. Dyatlov was basically the nerdy but cool kid of the Soviet mountaineering group. He was an engineering student at the Ural Polytech University. He loved building his own radio equipment, and was one of the people who just seemed to have his life together. Friends described him as confident, smart, and level-headed, the exact kind of guy you'd want leading you into a frozen hell. The rest of the crew, all students or recent graduates of the same school, age ranged from 20 to 24, with one outlier, Simeon Zolotirov. 38, a World War II veteran who joined the group last minute. Everyone else knew each other very well, and they were all skilled outdoorsmen and women. They had to be, because this trek was something they were attempting to qualify for a grade 3 hiking certification, the highest level you could get in the Soviet Union at that time. Originally, there was a 10th member, Yuri Yudin, but early in the journey, he got sick and turned back. At the time, he probably felt disappointed. Later, he admitted it saved his life. He became the only survivor of the Dyatlov expedition, not because of luck, but because his back hurt too much to keep skiing. Imagine living with that twist of fate. Their goal was to ski across the Ural Mountains to reach Mount Otordin, a trek of over 200 miles. Not exactly a walk in the park. Still, everything was going well at first. The group kept a diary together, wrote songs, snapped pictures with their cameras. If you look at the recovered film rolls, it's a bunch of happy, bundled-up 20-something-year-olds who clearly had no clue what was coming. By January 31st, 1959, they had reached the edge of the highlands, which prepared for the final climb. They cached food and supplies for the return trip and headed towards the Mountain of the Dead. February 1st, 1959 would be the last night that they were ever seen alive. Instead of heading down into the safety of the forest, they pitched their tent right on the side of the mountain, exposed to the elements, winds, howling, and more. Some say Dyatlov wanted to practice camping in harsh conditions. Others say they were simply lost in the daylight and stopped where they were. Whatever the reason, they built their tent on that slope. That night, something happened. Something so terrifying or confusing that 9 seasoned hikers cut their way out of their own tent from the inside and walked barefoot into a snowstorm. And that's where things start to get strange. Back at home, the hikers' families were expecting a telegram from Dyatlov by February 12th. Nothing came. At first, no one panicked. Delays weren't unusual in these long treks. But by the 20th, when days had gone by with zero word, the school and the parents had had enough. Search parties were organized. First, students and volunteers, then the military. On February 26, 1959, rescuers stumbled upon the campsite, and what they found instantly told them this was not a normal tragedy. There was a tent half buried in snow, battered by wind, but it wasn't collapsed. It was still partially standing. The weird part, the canvas had been slashed open, not from the outside like a bear that was trying to rip its way in, from the inside. It was as if hikers had clawed their way out in a hurry. Inside, their boots, coats, food, cameras, and even a flask of vodka. Everything was neatly placed, like they'd laid out everything and expected to come right back. Their shoes were lined up, their clothes were folded. It was as if they walked out calmly into the negative 30 degrees weather with basically no protection. Rescuers followed a trail of footprints leading away from the tent. Here's the thing. The footprints weren't frantic. No sign of a stampede, no wild running, just walking, barefoot or in socks, straight towards the forest about a mile downhill. At the end of the woods, under a giant cedar tree, the search team found the first two bodies, Yuri and Yuri. They were barefoot, wearing only their underwear. Nearby, the cedar tree was scorched, branches broken up to 5 to 15 feet, as if someone had climbed it or torn at it desperately. Beneath the tree, a small campfire. These two had clearly tried to survive but froze to death in the snow. Not far from them, 3 more bodies were found, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, spaced out as they had tried to crawl back to the tent. Their positions suggested determination, hands clawing at the snow but never making it. At this point, 5 bodies had been found. All died of hypothermia, which was tragic but not that unusual in Siberia. Except, why leave the tent? Why be half-dressed? Why split up? The real nightmare came 2 months later, when the snow melted in the ravine. The searchers found the remaining 4. And these weren't simple frostbite victims. 1 had a fractured skull, 2 had shattered ribs, broken inward like they'd been crushed by a massive force, yet no external wounds. Another was missing her eyes and tongue, and if that's not weird enough, tests later revealed radiation on their clothing. So now investigators were staring at a scene that made no sense. A cut-open tent, 9 hikers dead, bizarre injuries, radiation, and no clear cause. Theories started piling up fast. Now to the autopsies. So 9 hikers. 5 were found fairly quickly, 4 not until spring. But when the medical examiners got their hands on the bodies, what they found didn't add up to your standard oops, Siberia is cold death. Let's start with the first 2, Krivnishenko and Doroshenko, the guys under the cedar tree. They were barefoot in just their underwear. Their hands were shredded with cuts and bruises, almost like they'd been clawing at something. The cedar tree itself had broken branches up to 15 feet high, so it looks like they either climbed or scrambled up that tree in desperation. One of them even had burned skin, like he'd been too close to the fire they tried to make. Cause of death, hypothermia. Simple enough, but already, why climb the tree? Why were they so desperate? Next, Dyatlov, Komogrova, and Slobin. The 3 found between the tree and the tent. They were dressed a little more warmly, but still missing critical clothing, like boots, gloves, and heavy coats. They died while apparently trying to crawl back uphill towards the tent. Dyatlov had bruising on his fists, like he'd been in a fight. Kolmogorova had scratches on her face, and Slobodin had a cracked skull. But the doctor said it wasn't fatal, more like he fell, hit his head, and froze to death. Cause of death, hypothermia, officially. Now to the good stuff. These last 4, they went on full-on X-Files. They weren't found until May, once the snow melted in a ravine about 250 feet from the cedar tree. These hikers' injuries were the worst by far. They had massive skull fractures like they'd been hit with a car. The force was so great the doctor said it couldn't have been caused by one simple fall. Broken ribs, internal bleeding. Most famously, tongue and eyes gone. Officially, it was chalked up to decomposition and scavenging by animals, but still, no tongue makes for great UFO theories. Oh, yeah, and don't forget her eyes are gone. Now, the last 2, the one was an older veteran, had the same chest trauma, multiple broken ribs, lungs filled with blood, again, massive pressure, no external wounds. The last guy, he was the least damaged, but his body still had odd bruises and clothing tested radioactive. And yep, you heard that right, radioactive clothing. Some garments show high levels of radiation, far above normal, which is not what you expect to find on a camping trip. The official reports were a mess. Some deaths were hypothermia, others listed as death from force of unknown origin. Radiation was noted, then brushed aside. The missing eyes and tongue were waved off as natural decay, but altogether, it was like the scene was daring people to come up with an explanation. 9 hikers, some froze, some were crushed with inhumane force, 1 lost her tongue, some had radiation on their clothes, and all of them were barefoot, underdressed, out in the middle of the night, and had calmly walked into nothing. No footprints of attackers, no signs of fight between them, just 9 experienced people who suddenly lost every ounce of survival instinct. And that, my friends, is why the case spiraled into one of the biggest rabbit holes in modern mystery, because the bodies alone raise more questions than answers. So, the $1 million question, what the hell happened on that mountain? Let's climb the theory ladder. We'll start at the ground level. What the official explanations say, and the end way up in the clouds crazy. Spoiler, none of them fit perfectly. All right, theory number one, avalanche. And this was the conclusion in 2020. The idea is that a sudden slab of snow collapsed near their tent. The hikers, terrified the whole slope would bury them, slashed the tent open and fled into the tree line. Some froze, others fell into the ravine and were crushed by heavy snow. End of story. Sounds tidy, except the site didn't really fit the avalanche conditions. The slope was too shallow, only about 15 degrees. Rescuers said that the tent wasn't buried, and the footprints were visible leading away for nearly a mile. If a roaring avalanche hit, those would have been wiped clean. Even modern avalanche experts admit maybe possible, but not a slam dunk. Number two, infrasound. Nature's way of trolling humans. The catabolic winds are sudden, violent, and gusty. They can tear down the side of a mountain at hurricane force. Pair that with infrasound, low-frequency vibrations caused by wind patterns that can induce nausea, dread, and even panic. So maybe the group heard terrifying noises, thought the tent was collapsing, and fled in confusion. That explains why they cut out and walked away barefoot. But does it explain broken ribs like a car crash, missing tongue, radiation? Nope. Number three, paradoxical undressing. Hypothermia can trick the brain. Victims sometimes feel like they're burning up and stripped naked. This could explain why so many were underdressed. But again, you're left with, why leave the tent in the first place? Why did some die with catastrophic injuries? Number four, Mansi attack. A local indigenous Mansi people called the mountain of the dead. Some think maybe the hikers trespassed on sacred land and were attacked. But investigators found only hikers' footprints, no strangers, no signs of a struggle. Plus, let's be real, the injuries are more consistent with a car wreck than a fight with ski poles. Number five, military testing. Remember, this was the Soviet Union in 1959. Secret military projects were everywhere. Some speculate hikers accidentally wandered into the zone of the parachute mines, explosives dropped from planes that detonated above the ground. Those can cause massive internal injuries without external wounds, which fits the broken ribs and skulls. That could also explain why some clothing was radioactive, maybe contaminated with weapons testing material. And the government, definitely shady about the case. Files were lost, investigators were muzzled, witnesses talked about strange orange lights in the sky that night. Military test gone wrong? It checks some boxes. Number six, UFOs. Ah, yes, orange lights. Multiple people in nearby villages swore they saw glowing orbs in the sky around the time the hikers died. The hikers themselves even photographed strange lights in the sky on their camera roll. Combine that with missing tongue, missing eyes, and radiation, you've got a whole buffet for UFO believers. Problem is, aliens leave no paperwork. It's all vibes. Number seven, the Yeti cryptid theory. Yes, people have seriously suggested this. The hikers' diaries even had a tongue-in-cheek note where they called the expedition the Evening Orton and joked it was being watched by a snowman. Then some of their photos showed weird shadows in the snow, which conspiracy theorists claim to be Bigfoot photobombing. Okay. Could a giant cryptid crush ribs without leaving claw marks? Maybe if it bear hugged them into oblivion. But again, no footprints except the hikers, unless of course Soviet Yetis fly. Number eight, the Soviet cover-up cocktail. And then there's the all of the above theory. Some blend of secret military testing, government cover-up, and Mother Nature's wrath. Maybe they saw something they weren't supposed to. Maybe they were collateral damage in an experiment. The radiation, the sealed files, the half-baked official explanations, they all smell fishy. In other words, either this was a freak accident dressed up in a mystery, or the truth was buried in the snow right along with the hikers. So in closing, here we are, more than 60 years later, still staring into the blizzard that swallowed 9 young hikers on that slope. The official verdict today is avalanche. The unofficial consensus, nobody buys that. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become one of those mysteries that refuses to die, because every explanation leaves something out. If it was hypothermia, why the crushed ribs? If it was an avalanche, why the calm footprints and untouched tent? If it was just radiation, why were only some clothes contaminated? And if it was just a Soviet secrecy, why not come up with a cleaner cover story? The truth is, maybe it was a mix. A bad camp spot, a freak snow accident, panic, hypothermia, and an unfortunate fall into a ravine. All right, guys, this is the end. Next week, we're going to talk about John Benet Ramsey. I got a lot of information from the Freedom of Information Act, surprisingly, and I have some things that I never knew. And probably you've never heard these things either, so I'm pretty excited about that. So I will see you guys next week, and this is Southern Fried Felonies.